Everything we need to know about LSU, at least as we sit here in June. The biggest questions, the first one for me and everyone down there, is the defensive backfield, the secondary. They went and portaled a secondary in, basically. They got Denver Harris. In the last transfer portal rankings updates, Denver Harris got upgraded to a 5-star. Why? Well, because he was never a risk physically. It was just an off-the-field thing with A&M last year. If he has his head on straight, he's one of the best players in the country at his position. And he had a great spring for LSU by all accounts, according to our insiders down there. That's one. Now, we got to have the rest of them pan out, too. And maybe we'll have a really good secondary there. I know what history says. I know what logic says. Logic would tell you you're not going to hit 100% on bringing in that many portal guys in one position room. And I get that sentiment. For LSU's sake, they need to hope that that's not true. They need to hope they're the exception to the rule. And I'll tell you, you won't have to wait too long. They play FSU in week 1, okay? So you won't have to wait long at all. But, even if they get by FSU and it's a weird, ugly week 1 game, happens sometimes, they go on the road in week 3 and they play Mississippi State. And they play Will Rogers, the most underrated quarterback in America. Let's see what that secondary looks like. We'll get a really, really good feel that day for LSU. So that's question number 1. Question number 2 is their own quarterback position. Jaden Daniels coming back this year. Jaden Daniels as a passer. How much can he improve? Is it reasonable for us to expect a whole lot of improvement from him? Because we've pretty much figured out who he is as a player. He's a really good player. But the skill set is what I'm talking about. He's had 14 games over the past 2 seasons where he's passed for under 200 yards. He's got more passing performances under 200 than he does over 200. He runs the ball very well, so he makes up for it. But think about the conversation LSU's in now. This is not some let's win 8 games and it'll be a nice story. They're in the thick of the SEC championship conversation. They're in the thick of the playoff conversation. They're going to have to throw the ball better than Jaden Daniels has to this point in his career if they're going to win at that level. So that's what God made spring for. That's what God let you practice in the summer for by yourselves. And that's, of course, as Meemaw would always say, what God made fall camp for. So we'll see about that. Question number 3. How dynamic are the other offensive position rooms there? We just talked about quarterback. Running back has been an issue for them for a long time. They have not had premier tailback talent in a long time down there. The notable exception, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But by and large, there's been more disappointment than fulfillment in the LSU running back room. Hopefully that's different this year. The wide receiver room behind Malik Neighbors. What are we going to see? I'm going to talk about Brian Thomas Jr. in a second. You're going to have some depth of quality of performance in that room. See, with both of those, the receiver room and the running back room, LSU always has names. If you follow recruiting, you can look at the preseason. You can look at your preview magazine depth chart. Oh, all those names look good. They got to pan out. That's what hasn't happened enough for them. So I'm interested. Very big question for me. How quality are those other position rooms? Offensive line, I could also list there. I think they're getting better there, though. That was an issue for them for a while, too. What is the best position group on this team? There's no place to go wrong in their front defensively. So I'm just going to go linebacker, and you can go defensive line if you want to. They are deep there. They are versatile there. Any position group that has Harold Perkins in it, I don't care if he plays outside or middle this year, or both, which he full well has the capacity to do. Any room who has him in there is all right by me. Omar Spates from Oregon State they brought in. Going to be another player that's probably under the radar because you've got Perkins there. But they got some depth. They got a really, really good potpourri of talent. Don't think I've used that word yet this year. And West and Whit Weeks, a couple of brothers. A lot of alliteration in the LSU linebacker room. What about breakout players? I think Mason Smith qualifies for this. Even though he was a preseason All-American last year, this is just being delayed by 1 year. So I thought he was going to be a breakout star last year. And I think he would have been, but he went down in week 1. And against FSU, it put a really somber mood on the game, and LSU ends up losing the game. And I looked at it and said, if there's one player they can't afford to lose, it's probably, outside of quarterback, it's probably him. And they lost him, and they won the West anyway. So don't let that get lost in all the Brian Kelly hype. He did it without, well, at the time, one of his very best defensive players. Then we met Harold Perkins. They're both really good. So the other one on offense is Brian Thomas Jr. I just mentioned him a second ago. You look at the receiver room, they need a wide receiver too. They need depth. They need the other rungs of the ladder to sort themselves out. Last year, 31 catches, 361 yards, 5 touchdowns. He's 6'4". Ooh, look at that special effect Colin threw at me. He's 6'4". He's 200 pounds. Should be a really good red zone threat. Should. I need that to just become is. LSU folks know all too well what I'm talking about because I'm right there with you guys every spring and summer, and we're always talking about what could pan out in that running back room, in that receiver room, and what should pan out. And more often than not, it hasn't panned out. But now we got a new tenor down there, and a new flavor, if you will. There's a new sheriff in town, to quote Shawn Michaels, and hopefully does big things with guys like Brian Thomas Jr. The schedule analysis is interesting for LSU. They open with a very, very tough out-of-conference opponent in a venue that should not be housing a Week 1 college football game, but I digress. At least they're playing. They play 3 of the top 15 national championship odds teams this year. FSU, at Bama, Texas A&M. 1 road, 1 neutral, 1 home. They also, though, have a really good East draw. So they play Florida every year. Florida has the worst odds in the East this year. Is it worse than Vanderbilt, though, Jesse? 2 of the bottom 3. Okay, so they play Missouri and they play Florida. I mean, outside of just flat out drawing Vanderbilt, it's not going to get much more manageable because there's no Georgia there, there's no Tennessee there, there's no South Carolina. So they got it good on that front. Also, if they can get through the first half of the season and you look at the back half, they've got the road game at Alabama that everyone's got circled. But 5 of their last 6 games are at home. They got Auburn, they got Army, they got Florida, Georgia State, A&M. All those are at home. They leave home one time after October 7th. So road heavy first half, home heavy back half. There's a stretch there. I think one of the toughest stretches, aside from the Bama game, they got a game against Arkansas at home. And then they go back-to-back road games at Ole Miss, at Missouri, and then they got Auburn at home. All of those teams they'll be favored against. All those teams they quote-unquote should beat. That's your little upset trap. That's the quicksand there. So be on the lookout.